Ashraf Haidari is currently Afghanistan's ambassador to Sri Lanka. He's served as deputy ambassador and CDA in India. He served in the NSA's office. He served in Washington and is a contributor to Strategic News International as well. He's on a private visit to New Delhi, but of course, we'll have to look at the situation now. And not a good start to the week, Ambassador Haidari, in terms of talks continuing in Doha and the Taliban claiming the attack in Kabul on Monday.
Yes, it's very unfortunate that they launched and claimed this attack on what is a civilian area filled with stores and schools, and of course our Football Federation and National Olympic Committee offices, and the number of wounded is close to 100, and with one killed, according to the report so far that I've read. And this is unfortunately the tragedy of Afghanistan resulting from an imposed conflict, which we often reject, which we continue fighting across Afghanistan, not just, of course, for the defense of Afghanistan, but also for helping ensure regional security and stability, because we must always recall that the Taliban in Afghanistan fighting our government forces also provides an enabling environment for a large number of other regional and transnational terrorist networks, including Al-Qaeda, which fights alongside the Taliban, and
the Haqqani network, which is part of the Taliban,
and Daesh. Well, it's unfortunate that this has happened at a time when we have called on the Taliban to sit with us in direct negotiations to find a sustainable political solution to this imposed conflict. As you know, over 3,000 Afghans who gathered for 5 days in Kabul last April, exactly the consultative peace lawyer Jirga called on the Taliban to discontinue violence against our suffering people and to commit to a immediate ceasefire, which was supposed in accordance with their request on the first day of Eid. But unfortunately, the Taliban did not heed that. They've continued this carnage of killing and wounding civilians every single day.
Ambassador Haidari, do you see any linkage between a spurt in these kind of attacks and each time a round of talks is held between the U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad and the Taliban in Doha? Is there any connect to that? Is the Taliban trying to show how strong they are while they negotiate? They're fighting while talking?
Well, traditionally, if you look at international peacemaking cases, normally the two sides both push back as they negotiate to somehow gain the upper hand, so to speak, and see how they can leverage that and the talks as they try to wrap it up and reach a settlement, and which is, of course, long-drawn process. In case of Afghanistan, it's just much more complicated given the multiplicity of non-state actors, and then, of course, their supporters among regional actors and beyond. And so certainly that is a factor that as they talk peace, they also continue terrorizing the Afghan people. And we continue, of course, fighting back.
There's Operation Khalid from the Afghan military side, and they call it Operation Fath, the Taliban. But in talks now, it's gone on 7th round. He's still waiting for a breakthrough of sorts so that the Afghans themselves can be involved in any negotiations.
Exactly. I think that's the best way to go about what we hope to gain is a sustainable political outcome. And that would happen once we actually start talking directly to the Taliban, whom we've repeatedly invited. Of course, on the one hand, we appreciate the hard efforts of the U.S. Special Representative to Afghanistan on peace and reconciliation. And he is also following a four-pronged strategy where, their focus is on the commitments to be made by the Taliban to cut their ties with terrorist networks on the one hand, and their withdrawal as demanded by the Taliban. And of course, also ultimately by us. Once, of course, the conditions have met the need to withdraw, so that the withdrawal is actually a conditions-based process, and nothing has been really agreed on that, as also Secretary of State of the United States, Pompeo, made it very clear during his recent visit in Kabul.
But he also said that he hopes that some kind of deal would be reached by the 1st of September, which sounds like a miracle, especially since presidential polls are scheduled to be held on the 28th of September.
Well, it all boils down to state actors basically holding the strings of the Taliban as a proxy. If they cooperate, it's possible that we could slowly move towards a, tangibly speaking, to a settlement where the red lines that our government and people have expressed through the consultative peace jirga could be met. Then we could move on to achieve an outcome that's win-win for both sides.
We saw President Ghani after 2014 approaching Pakistan. We've seen him again now meeting top leadership in Pakistan, and that famous speech that he has given, in fact, when he was in Islamabad at the Institute for Strategic Studies there, where again he called on Pakistan and hoped, and he was flanked by Shah Mahmood Qureshi, the Pakistan foreign minister as well. So the hope is that what you're calling regional actors who are pulling the strings change past, as President Ghani said, to look into the future.
Well, President Ghani, is visionary. He really discussed a very pragmatic, practical vision at the Institute for Strategic Studies of Islamabad, inviting Pakistan and the rest of the region to really become, partners in peace with Afghanistan, and to become a member of the coalition for peace, which is much larger than a coalition for war. And so the message from President Ghani was not only for Pakistan, but also for the rest of the region to come through together through Afghanistan and collaborate and cooperate against confrontation. And he talked and discussed the specifics of what a bad strategy is, which is the pursuit of what the status quo, basically the mistakes that we have repeatedly made, and that has gotten us nowhere in terms of stabilization in Afghanistan and broader regional peace and security, for of course implementation of many projects of common interest, especially with a focus on connectivity, and specifics of a good strategy, which is of course to abandon the bad strategy and to adopt a vision in which we share many common interests economically, and tend to take the stock of the current conditions today as far as what the issues are, what the policy issues are, what the policy bottlenecks are and bureaucratic bottlenecks are, and then to commit to a roadmap where we all commit to implementing the policies or adopting the policies that would help all of us unlock the numerous human and natural resources of South Asia as one of the potentially most dynamic regions of Asia proper. And the President made it very clear that in the decades to come, we're moving increasingly towards a Eurasian continental economy, where of course borders should be done away, where governments, much like successful regional groupings like EU, adopt common policies to move beyond zero-sum mentality, which has taken our region, South Asia, hostage for too long. And I think there are too many lessons to be learned from regions which at more or less a similar history of being locked in zero-sum and zero-sum wars and conflicts, much to their own detriment and their own distraction, until they realize that that's not the way forward. And the way forward is what President Ghani clearly discussed, and Pakistanis, from think tankers to university students to policymakers, and Foreign Minister Qureshi was there listening very attentively and frequently nodding. And I hope that's the message that the President clearly elucidated, and we hope that that would be heeded we see that Prime Minister Imran Khan is speaking in the same language because he's aware of the economic challenges facing
languages is going to
Pakistan.
be changed into actions is what you're waiting to see.
Exactly. I mean, talking is not enough, and that's why that the consensus is there. Each time we meet on Afghanistan, or countries meet on their own issues, say Russia, China, India recently met, or they've met within the framework of BRICS or within the framework of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They talk about these issues, how achieving sustainable peace and the broader regions of Asia basically is going to help countries around them.
You refer to regional consensus or coalition for peace rather than a war. Now, do you see say the engagement with the Taliban? We've seen 2 meetings in Russia. We've seen 1 meeting in Pakistan as well. There's talk about Germany getting involved again and possibly in Bonn. Many in India say India should also be involved in some manner or so. Are there too many cooks spoiling the broth, so as to speak, in terms of dealing with the Taliban regionally? Iran is there. China is there.
Overarching umbrella for the Afghan-owned and Afghan-controlled peace process, the Kabul process, which we relaunched in an effort to bring all these regional and international peace efforts under one umbrella, coordinated closely with the government of Afghanistan. Because at the end of the day, it is, our process, and we should own and lead it with others and a support role. So while these are all welcome, we have always encouraged these meetings to be closely coordinated with the government of Afghanistan so that we have a proper representation that actually discusses the views of the Afghan people as delegated to us, of course, democratically, but also through this consultative peace jirga, where, like I said, 3,200 people came together and gave the Afghan government
30% women,
yes,
about 60% youth, which is the future of Afghanistan.
Yes, a very clear mandate we got from the Afghan people after the end of that 5 day of deliberations to move this forward.
Master, if I can ask you about Sri Lanka now. Sri Lanka did not have a permanent representative of Afghanistan, if I'm not mistaken, until 2012. He was probably represented from India. Things have changed so much since you've been there. You're trying to learn from what Sri Lanka went through in its history. You've tried to get both sides together and tell us a little bit more of how both sides can cooperate and learn from each other in this process of fight against terrorism.
Yes, I mean, we opened an embassy in 2013. We had an ambassador for about 2 years, and then we chargé d'affaires, and then I was appointed last November, since when I jump-started our bilateral relations with Sri Lanka from, cultural to social, political to economic, and as well as even defense cooperation. And defense cooperation, there's the potential of sharing and exchanging expertise and experience and counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, and counter-narcotics. And here, as you know, Sri Lanka fought a 30-year counterinsurgency where they effectively defeated the insurgency.
And we saw what happened when the Indian peacekeeping force left.
But also the dynamics, regional dynamics, shifted in their favor because as you know, the insurgency in Sri Lanka also benefited from external support and from sanctuaries, training, and etc. That dried up, and once the Indian peacekeepers went in and moved out, and once also the Sri Lankan government and leadership decided to increase defense spending, and as well as exploiting the way the insurgency went from an unconventional force to being a conventional force, fighting the Sri Lankan army conventionally. All of those dynamics played to their favor and enabled them to gradually defeat LTTE, as much as they also engaged them repeatedly through many peace efforts and a long drawn peace process, which was mediated by Norway. They tried that route. They fought and waited. They gave also a chance to the Indian peacekeeping force, which didn't help, and ultimately they had to fight back themselves. But the conditions changed in their favor, and they were able to defeat LTTE. So there are clear lessons that we can learn. That we can learn many lessons from their ongoing peace building and reconciliation and reintegration programs. They have specific institutions, well-resourced, well-funded, at times run under the office of the president or by the president himself, which I've looked at. And the former president of Sri Lanka, Madam Chandrika Kumara Tunga, is actually in charge, and I had a good discussion with the Honorable Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, and we discussed lessons that we can learn and shed some light on ways that Sri Lanka and Afghanistan could collaborate here. So I've discussed this with the High Peace Council of Afghanistan to consider sending a delegation to Sri Lanka to meet with the senior officials in this area, including with the president and the Sri Lankan Prime Minister, and to continue ongoing cooperation as we move towards a political settlement. As that happens, we will continue needing such experience and expertise from countries like Sri Lanka to see how we can reintegrate a large number of former combatants of the Taliban. So that they integrate into their society, and then those interested to continue politics could democratically participate and that way move on.
Ambassador Haidari, this interview would be incomplete without me mentioning one force which unifies Afghanistan no matter what, which is sport, and especially now with the World Cup on, cricket. Even though the Afghan team hasn't beaten anybody as yet, and I predicted probably 3 wins, but they were very close to beating India, Pakistan, and who knows, but that's the unifying force within Afghanistan. Sport, cricket, football, futsal now.
Absolutely. We just did so well. We came number 2 in the futsal, and cricket, as you know, has done so well, although we are not traditionally a cricket-playing country. Our players mostly learn in refugee life, and now we are so proud of them to challenge, well-established cricket playing teams like that of India and Pakistan. And with some additional expertise and experience and the institution of the captaincy, I think leadership overall, even Indians, so we see many Indian friends have commented, and I've read that we could have beaten both India and Pakistan. And Prime Minister Imran Khan, I saw a tweet I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, saying the same thing, that is also illustrates, given the chance, Afghanistan could easily emerge as a fast developing country. And I think the role that President Ghani talks about is the roundabout. We are potentially...
Not the cul-de-sac, Toynbee he was talking about.
Cul-de-sac that we will not and cannot naturally remain a cul-de-sac, but we're already a roundabout. Flows of commerce, trade, and investment, and ideas supports, of course, people-to-people ties and contacts, which the message that I'm sharing and communicating to the Sri Lankans, encouraging Sri Lankan businesses, even pilgrims, because we share pre-Islamic Buddhist heritage, Bamyan, and with the largest statues of Buddha. So the potential in South Asia is vast, involving all SAARC countries, from, of course, India, Pakistan to Afghanistan, Maldives. I was just there when the Honorable Prime Minister Modi was there. Very important and very scenic, and which welcomes Afghan visitors as well. And then Sri Lanka itself is just on the verge of taking off developmentally. It just needs more collaboration, cooperation, the fight against extremism, radicalism, and terrorism. When we, the Afghan government and people have stood by them. President Ghani was the first world leader, regional leader to condemn the April 21st terrorist attacks on Sri Lanka, and we stand in solidarity with Sri Lanka. And like President Ghani discussed in Islamabad, we invite the whole region to become our partners in peace, which is, of course, a precondition for achieving shared prosperity.
Ambassador Haidari, again, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
And we hope the only thing that the whole region and the world has to fear from Afghanistan is not terrorism, but it's cricketers.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Sir.
you.
Thank you.